fields on that manifold. You say, why?
Try me if you think I'm bullshit.
Well, it will turn out that's the key to considering
Look
the
at
evidence.
this.
Okay? Okay, so we have these LG, these left translations, they're diffeos, and because they're diffeos, we can extend the action to
Everything starts from now.
on the group.
We all go down unless we stay together. Ain't no one man above the crew. You know that shit.
Can push forward
Crazy, man.
At the
When you
point
said that last time, I was kind of tripping, right?
H, and I think then I want here is to push forward at G. Right.
I am crazy. But you know what else?
Okay. So that's just the definition. You see, this is a vector field. The result is a vector field, and it's evaluated to create. And this here is not a vector field, this is a vector. This is just putting in formula what I said before. I can now define push forward and pointwise. Now, we're not interested in any vector field. We're only interested in a special class of vector fields. And those vector fields, that if I push them forward, and I look at the result isn't look different from the vector field starting from. Okay? So in the plane, we saw that R2 with the addition to the medium. Now, if I take what we would call a homogeneous vector field, we look at that, and then we do an addition, and we push forward the vectors of this vector field by this addition, which is increasingly push the vector field in this direction, and that direction, and that direction. And if it was a homogeneous vector field, after pushing, it will look the same. Okay? So a homogeneous vector field in R2, equipped with plus, making it into a Lie group, is a vector field that under left translations, or rather the induced push forward of left translations, stays the same. And the analog of this we want to consider on any Lie group, and those are the so-called left invariant, because nothing changes, the left invariant vector fields. So definition. Let G blob be a Lie group, and X a vector field on G, then X is called left invariant. It's called a left invariant vector field if for any G in G that I choose, the action of L sub G, which if it acted on an element in G, would just multiply it from the left by G. Very trivial. But that's a smooth maps, even a diffeomorphism from G to G. So I can actually apply the push forward that's associated with that. I can apply it to the entire vector field. And I require that the whole thing is again the same vector field. Nothing changes. It's left invariant. It's invariant under the push forward that's induced by the left translation. Now, that's the formulation as a vector field equation. So let me say here, this is the vector field equation. Since on the left and on the right you have a vector field. Alternatively, and it's useful to write down two alternatives. Alternatively, one can write this using the definition of what the push forward means. One can write this as, well, it means you take the push forward of a vector field. Well, you take the vector at the point h. Take a vector at the point h and you push it forward, and the result is of course a vector at the point gh, and indeed you had a vector field, so you can also evaluate it at the point gh, and pushing forward the vector from h to this point gh, the result should coincide with the vector field that's already given there. Well, that's the same as here, but now it's a vector equation. Vector equation. Now, how can that be? Well, because now you've got to say for every h in G, this is true. It's just the same as here, but written pointwise. Okay? So that's one reformulation. That's very useful. And there's yet another reformulation. One can write it as follows. So we start from here. So we take the push forward of the vector field at the point h, and we know that ought to be the vector field at gh. Now, this here is again a vector at gh, you know, and this is also a vector at gh, makes perfect sense. But now we can apply it to an arbitrary function on f. So now we take an arbitrary smooth function on our manifold, G. And, well, if this is true for all the vectors, they must be true that for all h's, h in G, and for all f in C infinity G, this equation is true. Right? It's just, if the vectors are the same, then the action on the function is the same. Okay? Right. Now, what do I want? Aha! Now we can use, on the left-hand side, we can use our definition of the push forward. What was...
It administers all the rules, it creates all the laws, it signs all the treaties and documents. It also shows us the long story of our own growth through time, reveals clearly the mistakes we have made, and would inspire us not to make them again. But in mind that having seen all the mistakes of the past, continues to make them personally in his own life, is not learning from the life that has been given to him. He is not improving. He is not using his time allotment. He is wasting time, failing to change his own attitude, and drifting further and further into the morass with which we are afflicted today. So we have these levels, and all of these levels have to be worked out within the time dimension. We have a certain number of years to work as far and as continuously as we can in the direction we want to go. And there is another dimension which becomes also very vital. Out of the confusion of the body, and we wonder why we should communicate. The emotion, we wonder why we should try to change. The thought, we are perfectly certain is correct and we need no help. But we are in trouble all the time. But above these is another dimension fashioned the universe in which he exists. The power of deity ordained the purpose for human existence. And that purpose is to fulfill the will of deity and become, in a sense, like God, knowing good and evil. So the spiritual overthrow becomes the basis of consolation. It gives reason and purpose. It gives courage in times of discouragement. It gives a definite consecration to principles and to the divine plan of things. The nature of that plan, the purpose of it, and the administration of it, these have descended to us in the sacred books of the world. Every nation has had a scripture, either in the form of a book or an oral tradition, in which the will of the creating power is explored as far as the creature can trace it. He cannot trace it all. But he becomes gradually aware that there is a reality behind life. He begins to sense why it is important for him to try to be a greater person. He begins to realize that his destiny involves the development of a divine power within himself, or the release of God through his own nature. He becomes, in a sense, a cathedral builder, for he is constantly building a house for an invisible power which rules all things. The human being is here to come to the direct experience of the divine purpose. He is here to find the one consolation that can carry on through all eternity, and that's the consolation of the power of God to perfect him and all other creatures. So faith becomes a very important soul power, and becomes more or less an ornament to the entire compound of man's nature. And it is, in a sense, the duty of faith to discover the reason for the mind, the emotions, and the body. It is faith that can direct them all. It is faith that can redeem the individual from the curiosities and misconceptions which have burdened him for so long. So time has to do with all these things. Time is the opportunity, the span for the ripening of reality in the individual. It is that part of his own place in space in which he is here to do the job he came to do. Now, very few people know what that job is, and they may never find out in this life. The only way they can approach it, as most thoughtful persons have approached these things, they can say, I do not know what the job is, but if I do not fail in any of my ordinary labors, I probably have done the job. Because whatever it is within the scope of normalcy. It requires no strangeness, no peculiar self-deceit, or no suffering for the sake of doing the job. It is when we do the wrong thing that we get into trouble. Now, time is interesting in another way. The time is a kind of orienting factor. Times are constantly changing. The great unrolling pageantry of time, from the beginning of somewhere in space to the end somewhere in God, this tremendous pageantry is not known to us exactly. It is partly evident through the great mysteries of the cosmos. It is partly revealed to us through the various arts and sciences, particularly mathematics. It is also to a degree made known to us in our own small pattern of life. But for the most part, we gain a moral insight from history. Now, history is a wonderful way of showing to us the actual purpose behind life. The average person cannot fully justify his own ideals. But if he is fairly well equipped historically, he can see why he should do the right thing. He can realize the mistakes and what has caused them and what has come from them. From history, he can find out what is wrong with his political world, with his social world. He can discover the causes of war. He can realize the causes and tragedies of poverty. He can understand the misuse of power and authority, and all